What if we're not the first civilization, but just the first one to leave behind anything we could still find? Homo sapiens have walked the earth for over 200,000 years, with the same brains, the same potential, the same fire for meaning. Yet cities, writing, monuments, and organized states only appear in the last 6,000 to 8,000 years. That leaves a haunting question. What were we doing for the other 190,000 years? We assume nothing happened, but the Earth is not a perfect archive. It's a destroyer of evidence, not a keeper of it. Coastal settlements drown with rising seas, organic tools decay in decades, and entire cultures can vanish without a trace if just a few generations forget. Archaeology is a race against time, and time usually wins. So maybe the mystery of the past isn't why civilization started late, but how many times it started, flourished, and vanished before we came along. Chapter 1. The Missing Millennia. For over 200,000 years, anatomically modern humans, Homo sapiens, have walked the Earth with the same brain size, same physical structure, and the same cognitive potential as us today. And yet, when we trace the arc of civilization, cities, writing systems, agriculture, organized religion, bureaucracy, it only appears within the last 6,000 to 8,000 years. That means nearly 95% of our species' existence is archaeologically silent. The common explanation is simple, that early humans spent those hundreds of millennia as primitive nomads, scattered in small bands, surviving from day to day with no time or surplus for anything resembling complexity. But this explanation isn't built on solid evidence. It's built on a lack of evidence, and that's a dangerous foundation. In science, the absence of evidence isn't the same as evidence of absence, especially when the very nature of Earth works against preservation. Wood rots, fibers decay, clay and bone crumble. If a culture never reaches metallurgy or fossil fuels, its legacy can vanish in centuries, let alone millennia. Add to that floods, fires, tectonic shifts, rising sea levels, volcanic winters, and constant erosion, and it becomes clear the Earth is not an archivist. It's a destroyer. Most of what humans have ever made, thought, or built is already lost, and in many cases, it was never meant to last. If a group of early humans built shrines out of wood and straw near a tropical coast 100,000 years ago, then died in a storm or migrated inland, what would remain today? Likely nothing. Not because it wasn't real, but because it wasn't preserved. Archaeology is biased toward the durable, the buried, and the lucky. Stone tools dropped in dry caves, bones left in mineral-rich soil, pigments smeared in shelters shielded from the elements. Even then, only a tiny fraction of Earth's surface has been surveyed, and even less with advanced tools like ground-penetrating radar or LiDAR. Most of our species' possible footprint lies beneath jungles, deserts, oceans, or layers of sediment, untouched and unseen. The result is a historical record with gaping holes, blank spaces we fill with assumptions. We assume humans were simple before agriculture because we haven't found earlier examples of complexity. But that might be circular reasoning. Maybe we haven't found them because we're looking in the wrong places or expecting the wrong materials. Maybe those examples were already erased long ago. Consider that the oldest known symbolic artifacts, like engraved ochre plaques from Blombos Cave in South Africa, date back 100,000 years, suggesting that humans were already thinking in symbols, making art, and expressing culture long before civilization emerged. These weren't crude survival items, they were abstract, intentional, and deeply human. Now imagine how many similar expressions have been lost to time. Imagine how many societies sparked, flourished for a few generations, and then vanished due to drought, disease, migration, or simple forgetfulness. If a single skilled artisan dies without passing on their knowledge, an entire technique or tradition can disappear forever. Culture, in its early stages, is incredibly fragile. Without writing, mass communication, or large, stable populations, knowledge dies as easily as people do. And during the long Paleolithic span of human history, global populations were often tiny. Estimates suggest bottlenecks, where only 1,000 to 10,000 breeding individuals existed at times. Under those conditions, even the most brilliant innovation, music, storytelling, spiritual practice, or architecture, can fade away in a generation. It's not failure, it's fragility, and fragility leaves no ruins. So when we ask, why did civilization take so long to emerge? We might be asking the wrong question. Maybe it didn't take long at all. Maybe it emerged multiple times, briefly, beautifully, and then disappeared. Not because early humans weren't capable, but because the conditions needed to sustain complexity, calories, population density, environmental stability, weren't met. Or worse, they were met and then lost. When we look at prehistory, we aren't seeing the full story. We're reading the last few pages of a burnt book. And maybe the real mystery isn't what happened, but how much we'll never know. Chapter 2. The Earth Forgets. When we imagine the past, we often treat Earth as if it were a careful librarian, gently filing away every artifact, bone, and building for us to one day uncover. But the truth is far harsher. Earth is not an archive. It is a destroyer, a constantly shifting, eroding, weathering, subducting, and recycling planet where time is not a gentle curator, but a relentless editor. Most of human history has simply not survived, not because it was unimportant or non-existent, but because the materials and environments that shaped it were never meant to last. The vast majority of early human settlements were built in places ideal for life: riverbanks, floodplains, coastlines, forest edges, but these are also the exact environments least favorable to preservation. Riverbanks flood, coastlines drown, forests overgrow and decay, and when sea levels rose after the last ice age by over 120 meters, they submerged an estimated 20 million square kilometers of once inhabited land. That includes the continental shelves ringing every continent, prime real estate for early humans. Today, less than 5% of these underwater regions have been surveyed archaeologically, and yet the few places we've looked, like Doggerland in the North Sea or Atlit Yam off the coast of Israel, have already revealed submerged tools, villages, and ritual sites. These are just the crumbs. The banquet is likely buried or lost, and even on land, time erases. Organic materials, wood, textiles, baskets, leather, early paper, disintegrate within decades in hot or humid conditions. Entire cultures could have crafted beautiful temples of timber or built knowledge systems on plant-based scrolls, and none of it would remain after just a few thousand years. Add one volcanic eruption, one landslide, one tsunami, and even stone structures can vanish beneath sediment or rubble. Worse still, geological subduction, where Earth's crust is recycled at plate boundaries, literally swallows land, erasing all surface traces forever. In equatorial regions where early humans thrived, the preservation odds are even lower. A 2013 study by Cooper and Stringer emphasized that the fossil and archaeological record is severely biased, particularly in Africa, South Asia, and island Southeast Asia, areas crucial to human history. High heat, humidity, and acidic soils destroy organic matter with astonishing speed. That means we know far more about early humans in cold, dry, archaeologist-friendly Europe than we do about the hominins who lived in more fertile and likely more advanced tropical regions. This doesn't mean those other places lacked culture. It means their memory was devoured by nature. Even when artifacts do survive, they're filtered by another force: our own preconceptions. Archaeologists are more likely to recognize evidence of complexity if it fits into our current timeline. A shell with engraved zigzag patterns found in Java was dismissed by some as non-symbolic until closer inspection revealed it was methodical, deliberate, and 500,000 years old, made by Homo erectus, a hominin species once thought incapable of abstract thought. The same bias led many to reject Neanderthal art for decades until uranium-thorium dating confirmed cave paintings in Spain, at least 64,000 years old, created long before modern humans arrived. Our assumptions filter the past as much as erosion does. We often imagine history as a slow, steady climb toward complexity, with civilization as the inevitable result of intelligence. But what if that's backwards? What if intelligence emerged long ago, flickered brightly in small populations, then vanished before it could root itself deeply enough to leave evidence? Symbolic behavior requires more than brains. It needs continuity, transmission, memory. And memory is fragile. A culture dependent on oral knowledge is always one pandemic, one migration, or one climate shock away from total erasure. Even advanced industrial society leaves a surprisingly faint trace. A 2018 study in Anthropocene concluded that if humanity disappeared today, our entire global civilization might leave behind just a few centimeters of synthetic residues in the geologic record. Plastics, carbon spikes, rare earth metals, recognizable only to scientists with the right tools. Now subtract all the plastic and steel. Imagine a civilization made from wood, pigment, fiber, ceramics, everything natural, everything biodegradable. After 50,000 years, there would be nothing left. Not even bones if the soil was acidic. Not even walls if the coastlines had shifted. We could be walking atop what was once a city and never know. That's the real danger. We assume that silence means absence, when it might just mean we're deaf to the language time speaks in. The earth doesn't preserve civilizations, it buries them, burns them, and sweeps them away. The question isn't, where are the ruins? The question is, why would any still remain? Chapter 3. Civilization was never guaranteed. Civilization often feels inevitable, like the natural end point of intelligence, a ladder every species climbs once it learns to think symbolically and control fire. But history, when viewed across tens of thousands of years, tells a different story. Civilization is not a guaranteed outcome of intelligence. It's a rare and fragile convergence of conditions: calories, climate stability, critical mass, and luck. Just because humans were capable doesn't mean civilization had to happen. In fact, for most of our species' existence, it didn't. The earliest sparks of symbolic behavior, engraved ochre, beads, burials, began appearing 100,000 to 200,000 years ago. But those sparks didn't ignite a fire. Not immediately. Why? Because fire needs fuel. For symbolic culture to survive, it must be taught, shared, and passed on, generation after generation, and that demands population density, long lifespans, and social continuity. Early humans lived in small, scattered bands, often numbering only in the hundreds or low thousands. In those conditions, innovation is fragile. If a shaman dies without teaching their apprentice, the ritual dies too. If a toolmaker vanishes, the method goes with them. Knowledge doesn't build, it resets. Civilization requires a tipping point. Enough people living closely enough for long enough, sharing and refining ideas until they start to accumulate. Once that threshold is crossed, complexity can snowball with startling speed. In Mesopotamia, for example, it took less than 1,000 years to go from simple irrigation to written language and monumental temples. In Mesoamerica, city building followed quickly after stable agriculture. Studies using agent-based simulations, like one published in Science in 2009, demonstrate that complex culture only becomes sustainable when population density and intergroup connectivity reach a critical mass. Before that point, culture is like software without users. It crashes easily, and even after civilization ignites, it's never safe. Collapse is not the exception in history, it's the rule. Every ancient civilization we've ever uncovered, Sumer, Egypt, the Indus Valley, the Maya, the Hittites, collapsed. Some quietly, others violently. None were permanent. The causes vary. Climate shifts, droughts, volcanic eruptions, pandemics, economic overreach, war, systemic fragility. A single disruption can unravel the whole web. Around 1200 BCE, the Late Bronze Age collapse swept through the Mediterranean, toppling nearly every major power. Writing systems vanished, cities burned, and trade networks broke down. Even in modern times, the Soviet Union, a nuclear superpower, collapsed in a matter of years, not because of war, but because of internal fracture. Male life expectancy in Russia dropped by nearly 7 years between 1991 and 1994. And that was in the age of global data backups and international aid. Imagine a civilization without printing presses, telecommunications, or antibiotics facing a similar unraveling. Memory is lost faster than we think. In oral societies, a single missed generation means stories, names, even entire belief systems can disappear. Without written language or physical monuments, an advanced culture could vanish in less than a century and be unrecoverable 1,000 years later. This isn't hypothetical. It has happened, and it could happen again. Today, we live under the illusion of permanence, digital archives, skyscrapers, satellites, global networks. But if disaster struck, whether from climate change, nuclear conflict, economic collapse, or biological catastrophe, how much would really survive? A few layers of plastic, some radioactive isotopes, and ruins drowned by the ocean. That's what our civilization might look like to distant future archaeologists. Nothing eternal, nothing immune. And that's the point. We are not the first to build, nor are we guaranteed to be the last. We are simply the ones doing it now. The deep past is full of forgotten attempts, civilizations that flared briefly and vanished, not because they failed, but because the world around them did. If anything, we should see our place in history not as a pinnacle, but as a fragile intermission. A moment between silences, a chapter written in sand, not stone. Our ruins, too, will fade. The real legacy we leave behind won't be in our buildings or our machines, but in whether we learn to listen to the earth, to each other, and to the countless forgotten voices buried beneath our feet. Chapter 4. Echoes of the forgotten across every continent. Ancient myths whisper the same warning, that the world we know was not the first. The Sumerians spoke of a great flood that wiped away an earlier age. The Hebrews told of Noah, the Indians of Manu, the Greeks of Deucalion, the Yoruba, the Muisca, the Aboriginal Australians all have stories of destruction, of resets, of lost ages and sunken worlds. For centuries, these were dismissed as metaphors or coincidences, but as science uncovers more about Earth's violent climate history, these myths begin to sound less like fiction and more like distorted memories of real collapse. Massive sea level rise at the end of the last ice age submerged millions of square kilometers of land. Entire coastlines, river deltas, and fertile zones where early humans would logically have settled were swallowed by the ocean. Today, these drowned landscapes remain largely unexplored, yet wherever we have looked, off the coasts of India, Britain, Israel, we find traces of life. Stone tools, burial grounds, even lost villages. These aren't cities with skyscrapers, but they suggest human presence in now inaccessible places. If an early civilization had emerged 70,000 or even 100,000 years ago, using wood, fiber, pigments, and ceramics, it could have lasted for centuries, maybe millennia, and still leave nothing we could find today. The deeper we look into deep time, the more we realize that the historical record is not a book, but a jigsaw puzzle, missing 99% of its pieces, and the few that remain are often discovered by accident. In the Amazon, LiDAR scans revealed over 150 monumental structures buried beneath jungle canopy, entire ceremonial complexes previously invisible to archaeologists. In Cambodia, what were once believed to be isolated temples like Angkor Wat were found to be part of vast, low-density urban networks, their full scale hidden by time and vegetation. These are structures just 1,000 to 2,000 years old, and yet they were nearly missed entirely. Now imagine what might lie beneath silt, jungle, ice, or 100 meters of ocean. The unsettling truth is that our understanding of human history is based not on certainty, but on convenience. We build our timeline around what has survived, not what once existed. And survival is the exception, not the rule. Even with today's materials, most of what we create, buildings, machines, records, would not survive 50,000 years without maintenance. Within centuries, concrete cracks, steel rusts, data degrades. Without intervention, even modern cities would crumble into unrecognizable heaps. Now strip away our plastic, our metal, our fossil fuels. Imagine a civilization that never reached industrialization, one that built with the materials of its time, rich in culture, but humble in technology. It could leave behind symbols, language, systems of meaning, and we'd never know, not because they didn't exist, but because the Earth is too efficient at erasing. We think of time as a line, but it may be more like a cycle. Civilizations rising, falling, and rising again in different places under different skies, with nothing but myths to remember the last. And the silence we hear in the archaeological record may not be a beginning, but an interruption. We are taught to think of ourselves as the pinnacle of human progress, but what if we're just the survivors of a world that tried and failed before? What if we are not the first to wonder, to worship, to build stories in stone and fire? What if the past is more crowded than we ever imagined, its voices drowned by rising seas and shifting ground? The myth of being first flatters our ego. But the evidence, what little survives, suggests something far more humbling, that we are only the latest flicker of light in a long night filled with forgotten flames. And that if we vanish like they did, the world will not remember our technology, our monuments, or our might. It will remember nothing unless we leave behind more than ruins, unless we choose to become ancestors, not just inhabitants. The weight of being remembered. We walk on a planet that forgets, one that buries, floods, burns, and rewrites itself with every passing age. And in that forgetting, entire lifetimes, stories and civilizations have vanished, unrecorded, unremembered. The silence in the archaeological record isn't proof that nothing happened. It's a reminder that everything is temporary, including memory itself. We may not be the first to dream, to build, to believe in something greater. We may just be the first whose signal has lasted this long. But even that won't last forever. Our buildings will fall, our data will decay, and one day all that may remain is a faint layer in the earth, chemical signatures, fragments of plastic, bones turned to dust. The true legacy of a civilization isn't measured by how tall its towers stood, but by what echoes it leaves behind. Ideas, values, questions that ripple forward. So the real question isn't, were we the first, or even, will we be remembered? It's this: what kind of ancestors do we choose to be? Because if someone somewhere, someday finds a trace of us, what story will they read in our ashes? And will it be worth remembering?